At the end of last year, articles started flying across the screens of people everywhere, extolling the dangers of ghosting in the workplace. What was a trend in dating and ubiquitous swipe right apps is now something to worry about in the workplace. And it's widespread enough that outlets were claiming it was a big enough deal that it even caught the Fed's attention. We'll dive into that and plenty more on this week's episode of Hiring on All Cylinders.
Do you want to add value to your business, or do you want to just be this administrative person?
And often if you look at your talent team and the caliber of talent in your company, they correlate.
You could hire the best person for the job if they were in your candidate pool.
All these individual employees, one by one, together, their voices all come together to articulate the culture of the company.
In the insanely competitive talent market that we're in today, chances are there's going to be other teams reaching out, trying to incentivize that candidate to come in and have a conversation with them as well.
So, Bart, before I even introduce you to our listeners, I'll posit a question. Has ghosting in the workplace caught your attention?
Thanks, Sean. Absolutely. We've started seeing a much higher prevalence of candidates starting to rebuff the offer letter even before day one, as well as within that first critical 90-day component of their onboarding experience, where they've come in and maybe seen that expectation is not quite meeting reality, and that has led to a higher incidence of that ghosting phenomenon that you've mentioned.
Wow. Okay. Also, your voice is so low. You can tell it's early in the morning. Commuters, let me introduce you to our guest today. Sitting across from me is Bart Macdonald. Bart is the CEO of Sapling, a software company based here in San Francisco that tries to address that critical 90-day period. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. Onboarding and then now the entire life cycle all the way from hire to retire.
Perfect. I like that. So I think this is a good place to start then, this concept of, okay, what happens and what is happening in our workplace today that is leading towards people maybe not showing up for a job, whether that's before they even start, whether that's after they've started and they're just not engaged. So really excited to kind of dive into that idea of like engaging employees and making sure that folks want to stick around. Let's go ahead and start jumping into some questions, Bart, and we'll see where this takes us.
Absolutely.
So to take a really high-level overview, can you introduce yourself a little bit? I said that you started, or you're the CEO of Sapling, but talk to us a little bit about who you are, what got you into Sapling, and what exactly Sapling does.
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to, Sean. And I don't think it's just quite the early morning podcast, which has the low voice here. It's also maybe the Australian accent, which may be influencing some of that. My background really has been at the intersection of human capital and technology my entire career. Classically trained in human resource management and organizational psychology in Sydney, Australia. The early part of my career spent largely consulting with medium to large enterprises around their employee onboarding and employee experience programs. Before I had an incredible opportunity to jump across to an early stage hypergrowth technology company called General Assembly. And General Assembly is in the education technology space. Had an amazing opportunity joining them sub 100 employees. And over the next 2.5 years, that company rocketed along to well north of 800 employees globally.
Wow.
And I had an incredible opportunity to hire and take part in the onboarding programs for many of those team members coming through, largely Gen Y, Gen X, and Gen Z coming through into that organization. And I saw firsthand this really broken experience that was starting to unfold for two distinct groups. Number one was the employees, and number two was the HR teams. And on the employee side, what they were really seeking out was, we're all about the experience generation now, right? Coming through and having this amazing experience being sold on this incredible employer branding opportunity, the opportunity to come in and have 2 to 3 years to do the best work of your career and have a manager coaching you, helping you to level up in your career. And that's the expectations that employees are having today. Secondly, on the HR teams, without having the right software to augment the people programs, they're just spending their time alongside people managers doing a lot of this very manual, repetitive, undifferentiated work. And so seeing some of those challenges that was creating this broken experience, both for employees and for HR or people teams and people managers led us to set out on a journey of finding some modern software to solve for this new world of work. And to our surprise and frustration, we didn't see much out in the market. And so seeing how underserved the software category was, that led us to starting Sapling, which is basically our heritage started more than 3 years ago now as a red carpet onboarding experience, helping new hires to have this incredible pre-boarding experience between offer acceptance to day one, learning about the company's values, getting introduced to their CEO, their team members, filling out all their paperwork and administration, so that when they hit the ground running on day one, they already feel acclimated to their team members, to the company culture, to the values, to the missions. And then they have this 30, 60, 90-day developmental plan laid out in front of them, which they can keep relaying back to inside of Sapling.
That journey of not knowing where to go when you start somewhere is always so terrifying. Like, I remember starting at my first job out of college and was like, wait, so I just have to sit in this desk all day? Like, and what do I do? And who do I talk to? And how can I further myself and more benefit the organization as well? So totally understand that. So wait, talk to me about Sydney a little bit. What was it like living in Sydney, growing up in Sydney?
Yeah, so I had an incredible upbringing. A lot of my time up until 19, I had not left Australia. And then between the ages of 19 to late 20s, I had an amazing opportunity to travel to more than 50 countries around the world. But I think it's often a surprise when I share with many of my fellow peers and colleagues and friends in America that the total population of Sydney is, I believe, still just south of 25 million, which is almost half the size of California.
That's huge.
Mm-hmm. I'd say the huge in terms of the size of America. And so definitely in terms of when we think about the importance of providing software to support global teams, that's definitely something that we experience firsthand growing up in Australia, especially when you're working with American companies. And again, I think, Sean, this certainly relates back to one of the ideas of wanting to start Sapling is when we now, as we, typically we're in this kind of digital revolution. Teams today and companies, their most important asset and IP is people, not plants and machinery. And so as part of that, they're recognizing that to find the best people, it's not necessarily just down the road in New York or Boston or Silicon Valley. They truly are starting to go global to assemble the best talent anywhere in the world. And as a result, HR teams may not be located in all of the places where their teams are located. And so that's why today it's so important to have this technology as the backbone, providing these consistent data-driven experiences.
Yeah. We extol the exact same mantra, right? That people, talent really are the greatest asset that organizations have. And I think you're totally right. We've had guests come on that are, chief economists and talk about the micro and macro trends affecting the workforce. And the fact that there are these highways, right, that exist between locations, between skill sets, between organizations. And that has never been a thing before, right? Before, towns would be born around a plant, right? Actually, I just saw an article about Foxconn in Wisconsin. And that was the way that talent pools were really created. That's no longer the situation. And so when you have that kind of distributed workforce, whether or not you're talking about actual remote workers or just many different offices and a really far-flung organization, what are some ways that recruiters or HR folks can try to make sure that everyone is on the same page? Obviously, there are software solutions, but what are some other tips or tricks that maybe you have seen work to help everyone stay on the same page?
Great question. And we're very fortunate at Sapling. We get an opportunity to work with some incredible companies who their approach is building out geographically distributed teams. Reference back the team at Envision, the makers of design or software for design teams. And they're now the largest wholly distributed team in the world, close to or north now of 800 employees. And some of the things that we've seen their team innovating, particularly in their people team and their frontline managers, is really leaning on different types of software. And this isn't just Sapling.
Sure.
These are other solutions like Slack and other channels to make sure you've got this constant feed of asynchronous information flying back and forwards. Secondly, in ensuring the importance of communication that's not just audio or written, and really ensuring that you're trying to replicate that in real life or IRL experience. And again, there's a suite of great solutions on market, tools like Skype or Zoom, Blue Jeans, that really create that opportunity to ensure that if you are dialing into a meeting, cameras come on straight away, and really instilling that as a company mantra to make sure that there's the opportunity to see your peers face to face.
Yeah, which has a massive, massive impact on just employee morale and engagement.
Absolutely. I was going to say, one other thing there, I think this is something that I've personally seen a number of companies grok with how to manage this thoughtfully, is when you start having teams that are split across different locations, time zones can start becoming a challenge, in particular around all hands. If you're going across US, APAC and EMEA time zones, it really does start becoming a challenge there. And so I've in particular at Sapling, we've got teams across Asia and headquartered here in San Francisco, and teams across America. And that's something that we're starting to think through with a lot more intention now. How can we be really enabling everyone to feel fostered and part of the culture here, and not being put out having to dial into a 9 p.m. or a 7 a.m. call, and things like pre-recordings or kind of switching out. So 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, flipping between, to make sure that there's no feeling of a second-class location. Everyone feels like they're part of the HQ.
Yeah, and that second-class location feeling, I think, is pervasive. So many organizations suffer from that. I was talking to a friend that works at an organization here, and same thing, like they have a Friday morning meeting every single week, and it's at 8 a.m. And like it's starting to grind on some of the San Francisco employees, because like, all right, like our engineer team doesn't get in here typically at 8. Like the fact that they have to do that's a burden. So I like the idea of trying to tap into technology to help with that, whether that's video conferencing or pre-recording, because like a lot of that stuff can be either shared asynchronously or possibly just kind of time shift a little bit. Kind of going back to this idea of ghosting, and I think that is fascinating. Obviously, as a millennial and someone that has suffered from ghosting in the dating world, I feel like the fact that it's moving into the professional workplace is somewhat comical and also really sad. So can you maybe talk, I know that your topic that you constantly talk about is this idea of yes to desk. So talk to me about what that is, and also how kind of this ghosting phenomenon might play into that.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. So really, I think there's some amazing people teams out there that have coined this term or phrase, yes to desk. And I think in particular teams at Twitter and elsewhere have really referenced this really critical phase between when a candidate comes through and accepts their offer letter coming through to day one. Now, let's kind of unwind what's actually happening here as a phenomenon. And so today, obviously the work that Intello and others are doing is recognizing that today, like most candidates are not active job seekers, right?
Yeah.
It's passive seekers. And so teams are reaching out based on LinkedIn, based on referrals, to say, who is the best talent you know for this particular role? And then they're reaching out and they're trying to sell the opportunity, and they're leaning in really hard to sell the CEO and the executive team's credentials, the amazing customer base they're working with, this innovative product suite, and so on. And they're doing an amazing job of then bringing these candidates through to a series of interviews, and they're effectively selling. They're selling the career opportunity, they're selling the company's opportunity in market as well. And oftentimes, after a series of very condensed interview programs, a candidate may come through to an acceptance or an offer acceptance, and the start date may not be for another 1, 2, 3 weeks, or even several months out. And what often happens is there's kind of this expectation reality gap where a candidate would accept the offer letter. All of a sudden they then get ghosted, or they go into the black hole where there's been this intense sales experience by the recruitment team, maybe the hiring manager, some other peers they're going to be working with, and it's this really intense experience, and all of a sudden they just don't hear anything from the organization. What's more, if there's been one team that's been reaching out to that candidate trying to recruit them, in the insanely competitive talent market that we're in today, chances are there's going to be other teams reaching out, trying to incentivize that candidate to come in and have a conversation with them as well. And so whether or not it's a candidate being dangled with an opportunity to look at another career prospect, or it's simply the fact that there's this expectation reality misalignment between this very intense, furious interviewing program to then all of a sudden be ghosted out during that pre-boarding experience, that oftentimes leads to a decline or really a withdrawal from the candidate before they even come through to day one.
So it sounds like there's just just two different speeds. So you have this intense recruitment process, and then it just drops off, and that is one of the common problems that leads to this ghosting.
Absolutely. And another common issue here, or kind of what as a catalyst of what plays into this, Sean, is that typically the recruitment process and the onboarding process can be managed by two separate teams. Oftentimes. So the recruitment team is often led by TA or talent acquisition teams. And then the moment that a candidate accepts the offer letter, they typically hand on the baton, if you will, across to the people operations or HR team. And it's then their role to then start the onboarding process, which starts with the administration layers of collecting all of your state and federal forms, employee signatures across handbooks and what have you, background checks, if you will, and then the initial onboarding process from there on. And so that's where it's just so critical. And we spend a lot of time really advising our clients and also baking this philosophy into our software at Sapling, of making sure that onboarding starts the very moment that a candidate accepts their offer letter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Intello actually started doing this a few years ago, but basically the recruiting team and the people ops team, as soon as that offer letter was signed, before Sapling, we had a bunch of different spreadsheets to help track it. But essentially giving the hiring manager, whoever was involved in that specific requisition, the task of essentially sending a handwritten note and sending some swag ahead of the actual start date, which just that handwritten note, like personalization before that person starts, something, right? Like it makes that person feel like, oh, okay, I haven't been forgotten. And then also pulling them into events before they start. So like bringing them to our offsite even before their start date, and our sleepaway offsite where everyone is having a great time. Like probably really like, hey, welcome to the company. But at the same time, you are part of this, and don't forget that you are part of this.
Could not agree more. I think about it as like a barbell strategy, right? And it provides outsized returns. The negative impact is outsized and the positive impact is outsized if you do not do onboarding before day one, or if you do onboarding before day one. Let me explain. Obviously, not starting the onboarding experience means that you're basically starting behind the curve, right? It means that the new hire is coming in on day one. They do not have that yellow brick road laid out for them. There's high levels of anxiety, insecurity. From a productivity perspective, the first few days are going to be spent just setting up emails, doing the basic administravia of document signing, and all of this can be completed and should be completed well before day one. So that's kind of worst case scenario. You've got issues around lower engagement, you've got issues around employee anxiety and happiness in the first couple of days and weeks, productivity, as well as ultimate worst case is ghosting, right? Withdrawing from an offer. The inverse of this is the outsized positive implications of starting an effective and an intentional onboarding program. And as you've just pointed out, Sean, it's really a low level of investment from recruitment teams, from people teams, and from hiring managers and other peers, maybe a buddy or a mentor, which can just provide these incredible outsized returns. And we hear some great initiatives like sending through some company branded swag to that new candidate's home address, which they probably shared with you. Also things like just recording a 30 or 60 second GIF or a video from the hiring manager, just saying, hey, Nick, Nicole, whoever, we are so excited to have you joining the Intello or the Sapling team. We've already got your onboarding plan ready. We've got an amazing first 5 days lined up for you. We'll see you next week. And just such a small, low level of investment will go such a long way for helping to engage that candidate. And that's really what that onboarding phase is really all about, helping to drive up that level of engagement.
So that sounds very rooted in psychology. So you have an organizational psychology background, yes?
Correct. Degree in human resource management and organizational psychology.
Fabulous. And so did some of those learnings through that program directly influence how you approach onboarding folks now, as well as the product that you're building at Sapling?
Absolutely did. And I must say, what we also saw was just this gap or kind of the bell curve of distribution, where we came out to Silicon Valley and we saw Ultimately, these incredible organizations, the Twitters, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, where they had obviously substantially large people teams that were over-indexing on the people experience because of the talent they were hiring. And so we looked at some of the practices that they were focusing on and said, it's very clear the results that they're having as an organization and the clear kind of alignment between the results of the people operations to then the bottom line results of the organization. However, not every organization has the ability to hire in such a high level of, or have such a high ratio of people operations to employees or workforce.
Yeah. So
what if we could create software to basically provide even greater distribution so that every team around the world, irrespective of the number of members on their HR or people or talent acquisition team, they still have the same competitive advantage. And that's where we created Sapling.
Yeah. And that's an encouraging goal, and I think it's one that needs to be tackled. So that's awesome. You touched on this before, the idea that more and more we are a society where people do not apply for jobs. We talk about this frequently, that people are no longer finding jobs are finding people. So talking about, this increase in ghosting or this new realization that this is happening in the professional workplace, does that align, and is it a matter of correlation or causation from the fact that fewer and fewer people are applying to organizations and more are being courted by multiple players for any given job? So a question to you is, do you think that a specific source of candidates is more likely to not show up for that first day than a different source of candidates?
Yeah, I think ultimately with passive candidates that are being reached out to, there may be a higher incidence of not coming through and really ghosting on that first day versus other sources such as referrals. Folks that have come from other team, being referred in from current team members.
Yeah.
Or direct applications through to a job board. And as a result of that, noting that there are going to be varying levels or percentages of ghosting based on recruitment source. I think it is prudent of talent acquisition, hiring managers, and people operations teams just to be more vigilant and judicious around that, recognizing that when you are finding passive candidates who you think will be an amazing fit to fill a role, just being extra vigilant during that pre-boarding or yes to death phase to try and eliminate any risk of ghosting pre-day one or in the early weeks.
Yeah, I think, treating every single candidate, every single hire as the exact same is somewhat folly. Right? Every single situation is different, and you can get as personal as you want. You can dive in and say, this person, Bart, you are, a specific individual, like I'm going to treat you as you. But there's also the ability to take a slight step back and say, okay, there's also the persona. And then you can take a slight step back and you can say also there's the source. And these things have been done in other departments. And yet I think that there's an opportunity for recruiters and talent teams and people teams to say, okay, where did this candidate come from? What is going to make them tick? And how can we make sure that that person shows up, goes to that first 5 days, goes to that first 90 days, and then 3 years has referred 3 different employees that are all current employees of your organization?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can dream, right? Cool. Okay, we're running on here, and I don't want to keep you too long. If people want to hear more about Sapling, hear more about you, Bart, what can they do? Where can they go?
Absolutely. So this is obviously a labor of love for me. As I said, I've been at the intersection of HR and technology all of my career to date, and we like to be very active in a lot of research we're doing, as well as sharing some of the amazing thought leadership and best practices that we're seeing from our clients right across the world. You can find us at saplinghr.com. We do a lot of podcasting, a lot of webinars, and we also have an amazing virtual summit coming up on the 1st of May. There's going to be more details on our website coming up for that in the next week to 2 weeks. Don't want to drop the bomb too early on our marketing team's working incredibly hard behind the scenes, but stay tuned on that. We've got some incredible thought leaders from all across the world who are going to be providing some amazing content for the talent acquisition and people operations community. Awesome. Well, we'll definitely link to that once that's out, of course. But this has been a pleasure, Bart. Thanks so much for stopping by on this rainy, overcast Friday here in San Francisco. And we're looking forward to seeing where Sapling goes. Thanks, Sean. It's been incredible. Thank you so much for putting this podcast on. We've been very much enjoying this over the recent quarters, and thank you very much for inviting me on today.
Absolutely.